My name is Bernice CHAULY. I'm from Malaysia. I'm a writer, poet, fiction writer, nonfiction writer. I've also worked in theater and in film. I'm working on a novel that is set in contemporary Malaysia. It starts in 1998, which is the year all hell broke loose. It was the year our deputy prime minister was arrested for sodomy. People took to the streets. It was it was a pivotal time in Malaysian history. And I was part of that anger that took to the streets. People were tear gassed. I was tear gassed many times, arrested. It was the first, I think, real public show of anger in a very long time. So this novel that I'm writing starts in 1998, and it goes on for about 10 years. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are so many parts of our history, parts of our narratives which haven't really been explored yet. The worst thing about being a Malaysian writer is we have a culture of intimidation and fear. And in the last month, several people have been arrested for sedition. We don't have a free press. So if you're a writer in Malaysia, you have to be very careful. You have to be careful what you say, what you write about. And I write in English, and sometimes it's actually safer to write in English. It's home. It is my home. It is where my stories come from. It inspires me. It makes me very sad. It makes me very angry. But I have a very deep love for my country. For a very long time, I was driven by grief. I lost my father very tragically when I was a very young child, and I grew up with this void in my being. And writing was one of the ways it helped me understand who I was and in my place in the world. Since that memoir was written, my stories are now driven by the desire to tell stories that haven't really been told. And I'm not talking about historical fiction. I'm not talking about a glorified Malaysia that was of the past, or an imagined Malaysia that's written about a writer who's writing from exile. I choose to live in Malaysia because I choose to use Malaysia as my context, however difficult it may be. So it's actually it's a choice that I've made, and it's a choice that I hope that I can stick to, because it's not an easy place to be in. You know, there's constant sort of harassment. You read the newspapers and the headlines, and they're lurid, they're just ridiculous. It's just our country is borderline. There's so much ridiculousness at the moment, and it's just, you laugh about it, but at some point you just get really sad and very angry. So I think to be a writer in Malaysia, you have to compromise a lot of things. You have to put yourself in a situation where you are in the line of fire, but then to actually remove yourself as well, so that you are kind of unscathed, because I think that you have to know how to look after yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And like I said, you know, there's so many stories that need to be told. And I see myself as a storyteller. I see myself as a storyteller for other people's stories and for my own stories as well. I just finished reading Ewan McEwan's latest book called The Child Act, which is wonderful. I got a signed copy from Prairie Light, so I'm really thrilled about that. He's one of my favorite novelists. And I really just, I'm very moved by the way he uses words, and just the way he works with characters. I also bought 2 collections of Louise Glück. I really like her work. She's one of my favorite poets. I read, I'm very, I suppose, discerning when it comes to my reading, because I have to make sure that I actually finish a book. You know, if I don't finish a book, then that also says something about me and the kind of choices that I have now in my reading, and the kind of choices that I want to write about. You know, so it sort of reflects the within and the without of my process as a writer at the moment. Rehman Rashid, who wrote A Malaysian Journey, who was also part of the IWP I think 20 years ago. When that book came out, it again was a very pivotal point in Malaysian history. It was the early 90s. There was a sense of we can do it all. There was a sense of that we had embraced each other. There was a sense of possible harmony, possible this whole multicultural project that is Malaysia could work. And he had come back from being away for a very long time, and he wrote this book. It came out at the right time. Now, upon reflection, I'm not sure if that's the same Malaysia anymore. You know, that Malaysia that he wrote about, that Malaysia that Anthony Burgess wrote about, Joseph Conrad. I mean, you know, Somerset Maugham. That Malaysia has changed very much, and I worry. I worry for my country. But that's a very good book. It should be read by all Malaysians. We don't get state support at all in Malaysia for artists, unless you're working with a propaganda machine that churns out, you know, propaganda work, government-sanctioned work. I disagree with state funding because I think it forces artists to become complacent. And I'm part of a group of artists in Malaysia, and we've been very resilient. I think it gives you a sense of resilience. You beg, borrow, steal to get your work made. You become braver, you become stronger, and you're not spoon-fed. You know, I think there are some countries where state support is needed, but at the same time, I think you can't manufacture talent. You can't manufacture a Booker-winning author. You can't manufacture you know, a filmmaker who's going to win an Oscar. I think it has to come from a process. I think being an artist, in certain countries, of course, it's you know, I'm a strong supporter of this festival, Winternacht Writers Unlimited in The Hague, and that they've been running for 17 years, and you know, with recent government cuts, they've really suffered. So in some instances where there is a tradition of excellence, there's something really good has started. And then when the cuts come in, and it affects, you know, the whole industry, the whole platform of writers very badly. So in that instance, I think it becomes very difficult to try and find resources and funding to keep something like that going. So I suppose it can work. I run a festival in Georgetown, and that's completely state funded. Not entirely, because I also work with the government agencies, different embassies. So I suppose there has to be a balance. It's nice to have some funding, but I don't think artists should be fully funded, because you do tend to become complacent. You need to be hungry. It's very small. Iowa City is the size of a suburb in Kuala Lumpur. I like the fact that you can walk everywhere. I like the fact that being a writer here matters. Yeah, I don't think I've ever been in such a literary environment. You know, I've been to a lot of festivals, but I think here the writer is celebrated, here the writer is revered, here the writer is loved, and that's really, really special.